Hey, howdy, hey, how is everybody doing? And welcome back to Disney Daily. The town of Halloween is full of all sorts of creatures, from witches to ghouls to werewolves and even vampires. But perhaps one of the most memorable characters in the film is a ragdoll named Sally. What I love about Sally is not just her curious yet cautious nature, but her consideration for those she cares for. Now, while a lot of things might seem obvious about Sally, like her love for Jack, there is definitely one aspect about her that remains a mystery. That being, is she psychic? The scene I am referring to is right after Sally delivers her care package to Jack. She quickly disappears before he even gets a chance to thank her. The next scene cuts to her going through a gate and sinking to the floor. Then she picks an old dead flower and begins to pick the petals with a hopeful grin on her face. The flower transforms in front of her eyes. It becomes a Christmas tree at first, but then suddenly bursts into flames. It is in that very moment that Sally foresees the future and knows Jack's planned Christmas is going to be a disaster. So after this, we are left wondering if Sally has the gift to see into the future. Now, with all due respect, if we got a sequel, we would have a better understanding, but since we don't, all we can do is theorize. My theory to explain Sally's psychic abilities was inspired by an old horror classic called Frankenstein. The relationship between Sally and Dr. Finkelstein, as well as their characters in general, are a direct play on Dr. Frankenstein and his big, green monster creation. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the movie, Dr. Frankenstein is a crazy scientist trying to bring his latest creation to life. In order to do so, he must send his assistant Fritz out to retrieve a brain. His intention is to bring this human-like creature to life. Unfortunately, Fritz steals the wrong brain and brings it back to Dr. Frankenstein, who puts it into his creation. Dr. Frankenstein's obsession with creation and experimentation is perfectly reimagined in Dr. Finkelstein. Finkelstein, just like Dr. Frankenstein, collects human body parts and keeps them, which they then use to put in their creations. In Nightmare, we see various body parts in Finkelstein's lab, such as hands, an eyeball, bones, and even skulls. This clearly shows he has access to various organs, which he then uses in his experiments, including brains. We see towards the end of the movie, he gives part of his own brain to what will be his wife, Jewel. I think this goes without saying, but clearly Finkelstein is not a human, and in fact has a hinge that allows him to expose his brain whenever he wants. So you are probably thinking, what does this talk about body parts and brains have to do with Sally? Well, I believe once Finkelstein gave himself his own brain, he decided to experiment and gave his first live creation, Sally, a brain as well. Furthermore, I believe that this brain Dr. Finkelstein put in Sally was no ordinary brain. It was a brain that once belonged to a very powerful psychic. Now, how might this happen? Well, as I've stated before, since this is a direct play on the Frankenstein movie, it's easy to assume that Igor, just like Fritz, fetched the wrong brain, and Sally ended up with a brain that was not only from an intellectual, but someone who was gifted in supernatural powers. Now, I realize that Sally jumps out of a building at one point and has to sew herself back together, and we clearly see her body is stuffed of leaves, but conveniently, what doesn't fall off or break open is her head. So it's reasonable to assume or theorize that she in fact has a brain in there. And it is actually demonstrated throughout the movie with her ability to think critically and her ability to use both reason and logic. Unlike, the Scarecrow in Wizard of Oz, he really didn't have a brain, and it kind of showed. So in conclusion, I don't think Sally was a naturally gifted psychic, but she inherited the brain of an individual who could see into the future. Now, my question for you all today is a fun one. It is, which is your favorite Disney Halloween movie, such as Halloween Town or Hocus Pocus? I want to know which one is your favorite. As always, thanks for being my guest here at Disney Daily. Until next time.